Well, good morning, everybody. We have a great day ahead of us. Really looking forward to hearing all of the panels, and I think we're going to have a great turnout. I think Ken's got over 350 people here today, and we'll see if we can start it off with a bang. So just quickly to introduce myself, Kyle Henry. I lead business development for EXP. Have been in this market for almost over 5 years now. Have a long history in transit and aviation, and really excited for what's here to happen in Florida. I would say it's almost kind of the gold rush of California. We see people moving here for lifestyle, tax reasons, and really have great opportunity here in Florida, as we saw with Brightline, to really set the bar for what infrastructure and transit looks like. So I'll allow the panelists just to briefly introduce themselves and provide kind of a 30-second overview of who they are and what they're here today to accomplish. And also no Q&A. If you'd like to speak with any of the panelists or have any questions, please do so after the panel or at the next break. So Danielle.
Test. Am I on? Hi, good morning. Daniela Morris. I am here representing Broward County. I am our Rail Senior Program Manager, and I'm happy to share with this panel. Thank you. I'm happy to share with this panel and with all of our attendees the program and the vision that we have to grow Broward County's transportation network.
My name is Ben Porritt. We've already met. No, I oversee corporate affairs for Brightline, which in my role is all of the public affairs, public communications, and government relations.
Good morning, everybody. Robert Villar. I'm the Chief Financial Officer with Miami-Dade County's Department of Transportation and Public Works. Not only are we the largest transit agency in the state of Florida, but in Miami-Dade County, we are the third or fourth largest county department, workforce of about 4,000, and I'm responsible for paying for all the crazy things that the folks in this room dream up of.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, so I think from this panel, it's extremely dynamic from the standpoint that if you look at each of these agencies, they're at a different point in the life cycle of delivering their transit program, right? As you heard from Ben, right, they're well into operations and completing construction. Daniela here is really embarking on the system-wide planning effort. And Robert, from a Miami-Dade County standpoint, is well into the system-wide planning and embarking on the design and construction of the 6 corridors of the SMART plan. So I think there's significant lessons learned that can be brought from Brightline, from Miami-Dade County, then through Broward. So maybe if we could start off, Ben, maybe if you could talk a little bit. We saw the current state of what you built and all the great customer satisfaction and how the shiny product that you've developed that a lot of people here enjoy riding, as you said, but that came with a lot of scars to get to where you guys are today. So could you provide a little bit of background and the current state and lessons learned about how you got to where you guys are today?
Yeah. So, I grew up, there's nothing in my career history that would have ever put me on a path to work for a train and a transportation company, except one thing, which is when I was growing up, my mom had the constant refrain, maybe your mom's said a lot of the same thing, which is, listen, patience is a virtue. Patience is a virtue. And like you heard that, and as a kid, it really annoyed you. But as you got older, you were like, oh, well, maybe I'm destined for transportation and infrastructure. These projects take forever. They take forever. And when you think about building a train from Miami to Orlando, you have, by the time we open up Orlando, it will have taken 10 years. Now, the good news for us is every time you do it after that, you hope it gets quicker. Brightline West was a late stage development project called Express West when we acquired it in 2019. Since 2019, we've expanded it much closer to LA. But think about this: in 3 years, it took us 3 years to get that project to be shovel ready, after it had been talked about since 2005. So you're talking about almost 17 years of development. We've only been involved for 3, but we spent $600 million of our own capital in order to get that project about 50 miles farther than it is today. That's incredible. I think one of the things that the battle scars that we have is how do we get past that? And I think there's public-private partnerships when we work with both county governments and state governments. They really hold some superpower, I think, in getting projects like this permitted quicker. Or one of the things that we'd like to see, and we can talk about this later, I don't want to hog the mic, but one of the things that we would like to see across the country are state governments and governors actually beginning to permit corridors where high-speed rail could go now, and then begin to auction those off over time to companies like ours. So I think that there would be fewer scars, and it would take a little bit less time for us to get these things off the ground.
Appreciate that, Ben. I guess, Robert, from your standpoint, as you are well into the system-wide planning and have identified your corridors, and being in charge of the funding, where do you see, I mean, we've seen some significant initiatives from the standpoint of large capital programs that have been presented, right? You look at North Corridor, obviously the South Corridor is under construction. We look at the Beach Link. So how do you see, and what do you foresee some of the challenges being with getting those through procurement into construction, and where do you see the funding gap in IIJA being able to support that effort from your perspective?
Sure. So I'll start by saying that 10 years is a good horizon. We've been studying some of these corridors since at least the 90s, right? As a matter of fact, the North Corridor that you mentioned was contemplated back in when the original Metro Rail was being designed and built. That revenue service opened in 1984, so 10 years earlier. So since probably before I was born, they've been talking about that North Corridor, and so local government doesn't move as quickly as the private sector, and so that's the first lesson for the room. Second thing is that we don't have just one laser focus like Brightline did, right? Their laser focus was, we want to get to Orlando, we want to get on the West project, obviously they wanted to get to Vegas, but it's laser focused. Here we've got competing resources, and everybody's a taxpayer in the community. And so we got to prioritize those. So obviously that's where it is. We're in a unique situation where part of our problem is that we have a certain level of funding that is available. And so when we look at our local funding sources, over the next 40 years, we accumulate a nominal value of about $10 billion. It's available for the operations, maintenance, and construction of capital expansion corridors. That's a problem, because it's not enough to do everything without the assistance of state and federal partners. And so in most cases, we're anticipating that we're going to receive somewhere between 25 and 50% federal funding. That takes forever. One of the things that the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as it's commonly known, has done is it did do a little bit of streamlining, but it grew the pool. Didn't make the process completely easier, but it just put more money out there. And from a formula perspective, so the monies that comes to communities based on basically population, that pot grew by about 30%. And so we're starting to see opportunities to incrementally pay for some of our projects.
Very good. Thanks, Robert. So Daniela, I think, again, as you embark on the system-wide planning and obviously can take, I think, a lot of lessons learned, especially from Miami-Dade, also have set aside a local match, right, from a funding perspective, which you're well into, and then obviously competing, right, with federal dollars. Where do you see your priorities in terms of early wins from a system-wide planning perspective, and where you are in that process?
Okay, so we're in a unique situation where in 2018, a transportation surtax was passed by the voters. That's allowed us to collect something like $450 million in surtax dollars a year. So while our neighbors to the south are competing for these grants, we've been able to start our system-wide study completely with local funds. As part of the surtax dollars, we've also been able to start some of the plans for RFPs and projects to help support things like the Broward commuter rail project in partnership with Brightline. And it's also kind of helped us start thinking about what our first phase in light rail would be. Now, going to your question a little bit more about our wins, right? This system-wide study, which we expect will be out later this year, is going to help us identify something like 150 miles of BRT in 7 corridors and also 20 to 30 miles of potential light rail for us to move forward with. And I think our biggest win would be able to get the shovel in the ground and start catching up with our partners up here.
Very good. Thank you, Danielle. Appreciate that. So as we heard earlier from Ben, right, interconnectivity is extremely important for an efficient, efficient transportation. I think if we look at today, I think we look at the first mile, last mile issues, one seat ride, right, that Miami-Dade County is facing. So maybe Ben, if you could start off, you guys have done some innovative approaches to your first mile, last mile issue, and really, I would say, are at the forefront of trying to solve that issue, as it's a kind of somewhat of an inhibitor, right, of efficient modes of transportation from a Brightline perspective. So if you could start off on the first mile, last mile issue, and then maybe Robert could touch on the one seat ride.
Yeah, I mean, we think about this every day because the longer a guest has to think about taking our train, the less likely they're going to take the train. If they have to think for 5 seconds, is it going to be easier if I take the train? They're not going to take it. And so like, that's what we're battling, is that kind of mindset. I think a couple good examples. One, no better example, and I talk about this all over the country, than what we've been able to do with Miami-Dade County. If you go into our Miami Central Station, you'll see you'll see two forms of other rail. You have the Metro Rail, which connects at 2 parts of our station in Miami Central. And then you have the Metro Mover that connects right in the middle of our station. And then Tri-Rail announced earlier this week that in the fall, they will begin service into our station. So there's almost no excuse, right? Like if you get into Miami Central, you can go almost anywhere that you want. But now we do recognize like there's an experience that there's a type of guest that ride Brightline that might not try other forms of transportation. And so we built our own first last mile system called Brightline Plus. And really that is designed to get guests to and from our station within 5 miles in as seamless of a way as possible. That includes golf carts, airport shuttles, port shuttles, shared shuttles, private rides, all of which that will pick you up at your house and drop you off at your final destination. 2 weeks ago, we announced a new partnership with Uber. It's their first with a high-speed rail system in ever. And really what that does is it allows you to book your ride share right as you're booking your train ticket just by clicking a button, and then that car will be waiting for you as you arrive. So those are a lot of the things that we're looking for. Is we know that people got to get to our station, and we know it's got to be as easy and as seamless as possible.
Appreciate that. And Robert, from a one-seat ride perspective, in addition to that, from an interconnectivity standpoint, right, we tend to, in Florida, think about north and south always, right? Where we have the Everglades to the west and we have the ocean to the east. So we tend to not think so much about east to west. But when you're looking at transit and transportation, it's extremely important to look at the interconnectivity from the east to west standpoint in Florida. So in addition to the one-seat ride, could you touch on kind of the interconnectivity from an east to west perspective and what you're doing there?
Sure. So I would like to mention that we love the idea of some of the stuff that Brightline's doing. We just can't afford it, right? So our passenger point of pain point is different, right? Our one-way fare is $2.25, not $2.25. So some of those first mile, last mile things, are great. However, as local government, we can't afford them, right? And the customer, public transit is a heavily subsidized business operation, right? The operations of public transit is heavily subsidized. So we're always looking for those innovative things. We've started some on-demand mobility things. I think that ultimately is the future. I think one-seat ride is a myth. Nobody really has a one-seat ride, right? If you live in a condo, technically you get into vertical transportation to come down the elevator to get to the street, and then you always have to get somewhere else. And so I think the with some of the partnerships that we've done with Brightline, Tri-Rail, and some of our other partners, it's making sure that that hub and spoke approach kind of works, and we have a seats. I mean, Tri-Rail, the City of Miami, Miami-Dade County, we actually contributed to building a platform for that Tri-Rail train at Miami Central Station. We have the interconnectivity to our Metro Rail station that takes you out west. Only as west as the Palmetto, but still, anybody knows that's pretty far west on the north end. We have recently opened a park and ride on the west end of the county. We're talking about probably 2 miles from the Miccosukee Casino, and so we're servicing that today. I think the idea is offer those options as much as you can. The challenge becomes on the public transit side, even though it's heavily subsidized, we also have to balance the ridership. And if the convenience isn't there, it's difficult. So some of the things that we've done is we've partnered with the Expressway Authority and have actually done dedicated bus lanes on the shoulders of 836. So basically, when the traffic on 836 slows down, our bus jumps on the left-hand shoulder and actually zooms through for a faster ride. And I think we've got a couple folks in the room that actually use that service and are very happy with how quickly that's become. I don't think that one-seat ride is ultimately really possible when you're trying to service the most number of people.
Appreciate that, Robert. I guess, Daniela, too, right, as you're embarking on the system-wide planning efforts, you touched on, right, BRT, LRT. Are there certain modes, obviously you mentioned, but are there certain modes that you're focusing on and or specific destinations at the moment? And if so, why?
Well, in terms of specific modes, as the rail program manager, I'm focused on the rail side. But because I am involved with all of our capital projects, I am, working along with some of these BRT projects. In terms of the rail technology, because we are still in system-wide study, that has not been determined yet, but we are looking at the potential of a light rail vehicle to be the technology of choice in order to maximize having one type of technology that would eventually connect us hopefully all the way out to Sawgrass is what we're looking at, right? Part of our system-wide study is what we've talked about a lot here is this east-west connectivity that Miami is focused on. We are also focused on that as well. But as we have to start somewhere. And with the start of somewhere, what we are focused on right now, and this was actually part of a transportation workshop that we had with our commissioners just this week. So this is off the presses, guys. We are looking at our first phase to start connecting from the Fort Lauderdale Airport to the seaport to the convention center, right? These are economic drivers for Broward County. The airport is looking at their own projects to have a people mover to move folks around the airport itself. We're looking at an intermodal center that would connect not just from the airport APM, but as well as with us in light rail, looking at commuter rail options that would all connect there and be able to move people who land here directly into some of the points of interest. The seaport has also had extensive growth and construction there. So we expect that to become another higher point of interest. And the convention center is under brand new construction. So those would be probably our high points right now until we can eventually move into connecting further through somehow Fort Lauderdale and out west.
Perfect. Thank you, Danielle. And I think that's a good transition, as you mentioned, the intermodal center at the airport, and Florida being a predominantly car state, right, as been mentioned. So there's the gorilla in the room that we haven't touched on from a transit perspective, which is the Florida Department of Transportation, right? And as we've seen, their budgets continue to grow. And I think we've seen some good traction, at least in the right direction, to develop a solution that supports, right? I mean, right now from a car perspective, right, the roads are jam packed, right? There's significant amount of congestion. So there has to be a solution developed, especially when you look at Miami-Dade County. But can you touch on kind of where the Florida Department of Transportation sits specifically in the Intermodal Center? I think that they're intimately involved in that project. And then we can kind of go through, obviously, on the Brightline perspective, you guys interface significantly when you look at the crossings and things like that, and are dealing with some of the challenges there. But how do we get the Florida DOT to become a partner to drive the success and solutions for transit?
For Broward County, we've had a lovely partnership with our FDOT peers. To say that, right, they're involved with our intermodal center. That section of land is part of state property area. But they're also involved with us in other studies. Part of what's helped us move our projects along further is that FDOT has been doing their own studies, such as the East-West Broward Boulevard connection. They're the ones that are leading the study for us right now for the Broward Commuter Rail South project to look into all of our environmental processes and requirements. So at least for us, FDOT has already been a great partner. We continue to meet with them, and the hope is that we can continue to work on this larger vision to actually create a network that will, increase the connectivity for the whole county.
Thank you.
So I'd like to echo there. I mean, FDOT is a great partner for us. All of our corridor expansions, we are absolutely counting on support from the state. So they're an absolute integral part of the whole overall operation. Not only because they own part of the right of way, but they have a big bank, and so basically from a funding perspective, they're there. Intermodally, they've been involved in intermodal stuff for a very long time. If anybody's familiar with the rental car center at Miami International Airport, right next to it, that was an FDOT project. They actually did that. One of the first TIFIA financed facilities that was done, that rental car center, and they were integral in the actual building of the intermodal station. So basically that intermodal station today accommodates Amtrak, Tri-Rail, Miami-Dade Transit, private bus providers, Greyhound as well. So they've invested a lot in that. I think one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is that in the Infrastructure Jobs Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, a lot of the money that was provided is a direct pass-through to states. And so in some cases, Miami-Dade County, Broward, and Palm Beach as the Miami urbanized census area, we benefit from some of those funding sources directly, but in some cases, the state's the pass-through. So we absolutely need to maintain that relationship with the state as we pay for our projects.
Yeah, I mean, FDOT's been a great partner for us as well. I think the area that we've worked on with them over the last couple of years the most is safety. They partnered with us on a federal grant, which we received last year for additional safety mitigation measures along the corridor from Miami-Dade to Cocoa. And then we're currently in negotiations with them on how to get from Orlando to Tampa. And they're a part of that. They're not just a part of that discussion. They're really leading that discussion with the locals in Central Florida on how do you get from Orlando International Airport to the I-4, where Brightline will then, build down the alignment of the I-4 all the way to a destination in Tampa. They're kind of the band leader, if you will, with the locals on taking that concept, using it as an opportunity to expand commuter rail, as well as put together the business interests and the theme park interests to go out and try to get federal dollars for that. So we're working with them all over the state, and they've been great partners on that.
Perfect. Thanks, man. I guess in addition to that, Robert, if you look at from the standpoint, as you mentioned, right, the color of money and how you structure these projects and allocate funding resources, right, from the state, from local match, we've seen some initiatives from a public-private partnership perspective, right? We've seen a significant number of unsolicited proposals within the county that have sparked procurements. What advice do you have to the public or private sector partners here today that would help successfully kind of move some of these public-private partnerships initiatives along, no matter how big or small? I think when you look at Brightline and what was done at Aventura Station and that public-private partnership, again, not a sizable investment, right? I think it's around $70 million, but very impactful and quick, right, as it relates to moving it along. Just opening Aventura Station. So, and then you have something like the beach corridor, right? That again is a big investment, right? Very impactful, has a lot of public scrutiny. So, any advice to our private sector partners here today?
Yeah, so I'll start by reminding everybody in the room that public-private partnerships are not the same thing as a P3, right? Ultimately, it has to be paid for, and so making sure that the finances work at the end of the day for the public sector is critical. And I think we recently had two P3s that have been kind of canceled or closed out without getting to project termination. And at the bar tonight, we can talk about how even though there is a breakup fee and everything like that, that's probably the best investment that could have happened for the private sector. From a negotiation perspective, the local government's got to be willing to walk away. Otherwise, we're at a disadvantage. From the private sector, I will tell you, the biggest challenge in setting up a P3 with local government on a transportation project is that the funding lasagna isn't there to begin with. And in the case of the beach particularly, that unsolicited proposal prompted us and pushed us into putting out a P3 procurement. Before really the scope had been decided, the environmental had been laid on. And so I think that the private sector was so anxious to get the project going that it actually had the unintended consequence of slowing it down. I think if we would have put out a P3 saying, hey, we want you to build this and operate this, I think the P3 might have been more successful at that point. Because the scope hadn't been developed, the P3 grew and practically doubled in cost as we went through the process of finalizing the agreement.
Very good. Thank you for that, Robert. So Ben, I think again, obviously being party to the Miami-Dade County Aventura Station, could you give us some of the lessons learned in terms of how you made that a success? And then obviously you're about, not Florida related, but you're about to embark on what I would consider to be a large P3 or public-private partnership out west, right, with the high-speed rail grant. So could you give us some of the challenges that you're facing there with that and what you anticipate and how you plan to move forward on the West project in the West? Yeah,
I'll start there. So, there's so much, like when you're building a transportation network that large, 200 plus miles across state lines, it's definitely not a private enterprise. It is a public-private partnership. That's the only way you can get it done. And we've seen tremendous support from everybody on the elected and agency side in Nevada, as well as in California. They've all been tremendous partners. When we submit our federal state high-speed rail grant in March, that's gonna be in partnership with Nevada Department of Transportation. And so you have to have those relationships and you have to have that there. In Miami-Dade County and in Broward, we have partnerships that are ongoing and partnerships that we're building. The Aventura one, I think that agreement was almost 2 plus years ago. And so we just got that opened and launched. And I think the difficulty in some of these public-private partnerships is recognizing, really what you said earlier, which is we got one narrow scope, like we got to get this done. And the counties are being pulled in multiple directions. In Broward County, they got the airport seaport, they got the penny sales tax with a bunch of different projects, and the commuter rail that we're negotiating with both counties is just one. And so, we're sometimes probably sitting there being like, we got to get this done, we got to get this done, we got to get this done. And they're like, okay, let me catch my breath from my last meeting and I'll be ready to go. And I think, that can probably be the biggest challenge is, is they have a lot more things on their plate, and their plate is only the same size as mine, and I just got one entree,
Very good. Thank you. So I guess in addition, when you look at these large transit initiatives, I think from my perspective, the number one priority to make these programs and projects a success is really leadership. Without strong leadership, I really don't think you can move these significant programs forward. So I think when you look at today, there's a significant war on talent. I mean, you look around the country today, every major transit agency has a significant multi-billion-dollar CIP, all at different stages. You look at the Northeast, right? New York is putting out a $500 million design build every week, right? So I guess what are each of you doing, right, from a leadership and talent perspective? I think, Danielle, you can kick us off. I think you guys have had some recent success in Broward County, specifically for Broward County Transit, to really bring kind of some leaders to the table.
So for Broward County, we actually just, as of about a week and a half ago, had the confirmation of our new director. So that's huge for us in terms of leadership. Broward County Transportation, we have a new director joining us, coming from Omada, CSX experience. Trying to think where else Corey has some experience from, but definitely something that was needed for us in order to have that moving forward connection with our commissioners, with our vision. Then in terms of just what we're doing in-house, the rail program, there's 5 of us right now that are leading all of these multiple projects, juggling these different plates. Ben has one plate, we're juggling lots of different plates. And part of that is looking into our consultant world and seeing where we can find some talent to help us support what we can't grow organically in order to make sure that these programs are met in a timely manner. And, just trying to figure out how we can grow and get more people interested in South Florida talent down here.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in and kind of echo the comments. We can't do it without the consulting world. We could never have the expertise in-house or the number of people. And while the CIP is big, doing a corridor expansion is uniquely different than just a traditional CIP. So basically, there's a need to ramp up to that specific project. And it's not a good practice to really hire people that you're going to fire in 4 years when the project's done. So that's finding that right balance of in-house staff versus contract staff is critical. I've got some of my contract people in here nodding their heads that they need more in-house staff. Yes, Bassam. But that really is key. And one of the challenges, and I'll tell you, having lived this challenge during the housing crisis, is there is a tilting point where the public sector can't hire resources because the private sector is hiring all those resources away. That will eventually flip, and it did flip during the housing crisis, and we were actually able to acquire a lot of good in-house talent at that time. And so, that point of equilibrium is going to be crucial, and I think we're probably getting close to it. We're still losing qualified staff to the private sector. I think that's a challenge for everybody. But we have a big pool of consultants. We've actually just expanded some of the expenditure authority on those pools and couldn't do it without the private sector.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, and we've seen obviously an uptick, right, from a procurement perspective, right? To acquire those consulting resources, right, you need to be able to efficiently and effectively procure them, right? So we've started to see in Miami-Dade County a shift right there to be able to focus on expediting that procurement process. Can you touch just briefly on that, on kind of upcoming contracts? Again, from a funding perspective is important, right? We see a lot of our partners from a client perspective not setting up procurements correctly and able to take some of the funding that could come down. So could you touch on both the expediting procurement for the county and setting up those procurements correctly?
Oxymoron, expedited procurement with the county.
Brightline does it well. Just kidding.
It is actually a challenge, right? And there are procurement rules on the books for specific purposes. And, as the public sector goes, we have a lot of rules and regulations that we have to abide by. And most of them are very well intentioned. Sometimes they have the consequences of slowing the process down. One of the things that we're doing is trying to make sure that we're better positioned to take advantage of opportunities like the funding bill that came through. Is we have basically and this goes back to when the SMART program or SMART plan originally started. We went out with a pool of consultants. We had 3 corridors that we needed to do the study work on. We're like, hey, we need at least 3 consulting contracts to help us each shepherd one of our corridors. We did that, and those folks have been working on those corridors, continue to work on those corridors. As we're now transitioning it over from a plan into actual implementation, where we've gone to actually, we have one of our corridors. Forget about shovels in the ground. I mean, there are roofs up on structures down on that South Dade busway, and more corridors that keep coming. We've actually had a need to expand that even further. And one of the things that we will be going out for is essentially like a program management oversight consultant type pool where we have those resources that we can easily access. Our idea is to have pre-awarded pools of consultants that we can go to, rather, so that basically when some need comes up, rather than having to wait, 18 months to award a contract, we already have a pool on there. The challenge is that some companies lose interest because there's no guarantee that any work comes from the pool. But we're government; we will always spend money.
Very good. Yeah, very good. Danielle, maybe if you want to kind of touch on some of what you're doing, right, as you're embarking on setting up contracts. I think you're following a similar process of setting up pools to tap into consulting resources.
Yes, absolutely. So we will have a contract coming out for program management of all of our capital projects. So Robert, when you get to that, let me know. I will help you out. But in addition to that, we have already put out a contract that is under review now for presentations and awards. And that's a GEC, so a General Engineering Consultant contract. That we would be awarding to 3 firms. And that's kind of echoing on what Robert was talking about. We're looking to make sure we can set ourselves up now and be able to issue those work orders, work authorizations as the things come up, rather than having these project issues come up and going through our internal procurement process that can take anywhere between 8 months to a year plus. And again, going just back to, how can we do things more efficiently, more timely, and
what are you doing from an FTA perspective? I think you mentioned earlier, right, in terms of anticipating some of the requirements, right, that could come down, right, from an FTA perspective, right? I think initially you're going to focus mostly on surtax monies, but as you transition to more FTA funding, what do you see there?
So I mentioned that to Kyle earlier because it's more of a personal preference of mine. But because we are functioning right now with surtax dollars, we're not necessarily under FTA purview. So we can build our projects and we don't have to get FTA into some of the processes with this. But because myself, I have experience in various rail systems. Our director of rail himself has 30 plus years of experience. We're getting ready now to set up our program so that we're always ready for those FTA requirements. And as a previous state safety oversight, I can tell you guys how critical and important that is, because the minute we accept 1 penny of federal dollars, we have to follow all of those rules. So we're not going to wait to try to figure that out later. We're setting the program up that way now.
Very good. Thank you, Daniela. Go ahead, Robert. You got something to add to that?
No. Just saying that following federal procedures is critical. I mean, we've got to do it from the environmental perspective, from the Title VI, equity perspective as well. So there's a lot of things that we do have to follow those procedures. It is a recommendation, a best practice, that we start with that federalized process from the beginning, just to make sure that we're ready when the funding does come across. I'll tell you on the South Corridor, we're going to, from a capital perspective, 66% of that project, actually it'll end up being more than that, because the American Recovery Plan Act actually gave that project even more money than was needed to reduce the local match. So when it's all said and done, it'll probably be 75% paid for by somebody else.
So we'll have more money for North Corridor.
Exactly. And that's part of the key is stacking the lasagna, where you use other people's money where you can, so that those things that you can't, whether it's because the project won't get funded, it might take too long, it might not meet the eligibility requirement from the Federal Transit Administration for funding, that's where at least in our case, that's where we're planning on applying our local dollars.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, I think we can end on that. Other people's money, right? Very good. Well, thank you all for your time today. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out in the break. But we'll move on and get through the rest of the day. And thanks, Ken, for setting up this entire day. I know it takes a significant amount of time and resources from your side, so we really appreciate it. And we're happy to have our first Florida specific Infra Day.